We were there as a team of specialized Coast Guard divers and investigators searched the Sea of Abaco for new evidence in the Lynette Hooker investigation here in the Bahamas. The Coast Guard team includes a cadaver dog. We watched as members of the team jumped into water about 8 feet deep, and some investigators got onto land. This Coast Guard team arrived in the Bahamas Tuesday as they probed.
A woman vanished. April 4th, 2026. The Bahamas. One moment, she's alive. The next moment, gone. The only witness to what happened is her husband. He told authorities it was an accident, a boating incident, an overboard situation, a desperate 8-hour struggle in open water. But federal investigators discovered something that turned everything upside down. Something that turned it from a missing person case to a murder case. If you want answers about what really happened to Lynette Hooker, hit subscribe right now. This is the investigation that exposed the truth. Also, let us know where you are watching from. Search teams mobilized within hours. Coast Guard vessels cut through the water. Sonar sweeping, divers searching, every resource focused on one goal: find her alive. Days turned into weeks turned into months, 60 days of searching, 60 days of hope, 60 days of families waiting for news, for answers, for closure. The rescue operation continued with standard protocol, expanding circles, methodical grids. Each day, hope faded a little more. Then something happened that nobody expected. In early June 2026, federal investigators made a decision that shocked everyone involved in the case. The United States Coast Guard stopped searching for a missing person. They started investigating a murder. This wasn't a guess. This wasn't speculation. This was federal law enforcement saying, "We found evidence. Evidence that changes everything about this case." When the Coast Guard reclassifies a case from rescue to murder investigation, it means one thing. The story being told doesn't match what the evidence shows actually happened. The question that drove investigators forward was urgent and specific. What evidence forced this reclassification? The answer would shake the foundation of everything Brian Hooker claimed. A retired Coast Guard officer with over 20 years investigating maritime cases explained what triggers this kind of shift. It happens when the numbers don't add up, when the timeline fractures, when weather reports contradict the story, when GPS data shows something different than what was said. Brian claimed he paddled for 8 hours with one oar. Federal investigators had access to information that proved or disproved this. GPS records from personal devices, electronic tracking from the sailboat, communication logs, financial records, every digital footprint in the modern world. The sailboat, the Soulmate, had electronic systems, modern navigation, modern batteries, modern computers that record everything. Federal investigators pulled the data. What they found changed the investigation instantly. The battery management systems on the Soulmate, the computers that run the boat's electrical systems, recorded activity during the exact hours when Brian claimed he was paddling alone in the ocean. Electrical power was being drawn, systems were being used, someone was on that boat. Think about that. He's in the water for 8 hours, but someone is on his boat, using his systems, drawing power. That's not possible. That's a contradiction that doesn't have a simple explanation. The weather data made it worse. National weather records showed actual conditions that night. Wind speeds, sea state, visibility, what really happened in those waters, and it didn't match his story. The weather wasn't as severe as he claimed. The conditions weren't as dangerous. The narrative fell apart when compared to official data. One person's movements can be tracked through their phone. GPS coordinates, location data. This creates a timeline that cannot be disputed. Investigators had this information. They knew where people actually were. They knew when. His account claimed one thing. The evidence showed another. The personal device data told investigators something critical. His movements, her movements, where they actually were, when they actually were there. This wasn't subjective. This wasn't memory. This was fact recorded by technology. Investigators reconstructed the timeline piece by piece. Where was the sailboat positioned at each moment? The electronic systems answered. What happened aboard the vessel during those critical hours? The battery logs showed. Where did communications occur? The phone records documented. What were actual weather conditions? Official meteorological data confirmed. With each piece, the contradictions grew. Not small inconsistencies, major ones, the kind that reveal a fundamentally false narrative. Federal authorities realized they weren't investigating an accident. They were investigating a crime. The decision hit like a shockwave through the investigative community. Federal authorities mobilized at a scale most people never witness. This wasn't routine. This was extraordinary. A 150-foot Coast Guard cutter arrived in Marsh Harbor, Bahamas. This vessel became a floating command center. Inside, investigators worked around the clock, analyzing data, coordinating teams, directing resources across multiple zones. The operation ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Specialized dive teams deployed, elite federal maritime specialists. These weren't recreational divers. These were trained for extreme conditions, limited visibility, dangerous currents. Their mission was clear: find evidence. Underwater drones arrived, remote-operated vehicles equipped with advanced cameras and sonar systems. These machines mapped the seafloor in targeted locations, not random, specific. Investigators knew where to look because the data told them where to look. More than 25 personnel arrived: federal investigators, forensic specialists, evidence technicians, support staff, every position filled by someone with specialized training. And then came Maggie. Maggie is a cadaver detection dog. This dog was trained to detect something most people don't understand: chemical compounds, decomposition markers. These are released through natural processes and exist in the environment: water, soil, sand. Maggie can detect them from remarkable distances. Her arrival meant something specific. Investigators weren't just collecting evidence. They were searching for a missing person. Someone they feared might be found in those waters. A mother, a wife, a woman who disappeared on April 4th. The operational focus narrowed to specific zones, not broad sweeps, specific locations. One area drew concentrated federal attention: an abandoned man-made harbor, a structure that once served commercial purposes, now mostly forgotten, its waters undisturbed, except that investigators had data suggesting something was there. Why that location? Investigators didn't explain publicly, but they concentrated resources there because evidence pointed there. GPS data, electronic records, maybe witness information. Something made federal authorities certain this location mattered. The soulmate was removed from the water, not examined casually, transported to a secure facility, a controlled environment where forensic technicians could analyze every detail, every electronic system, every log file, every piece of equipment. They examined what systems activated, when electrical power was drawn, whether water systems were used, whether navigation systems engaged. Every action leaves a signature. Every signature tells a story. Forensic technicians worked methodically, documenting, recording, analyzing. The boat became a witness. It told investigators what happened aboard during those critical hours. Modern vessels create comprehensive records, automatic, detailed, impossible to falsify. The Soulmate systems documented everything that occurred during the night in question. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't guesswork. This was federal investigators building a case using evidence that cannot be disputed. The scale of the response made one fact unmistakable. Federal authorities possessed serious information. They moved beyond searching for a missing person. They started gathering evidence against someone. Federal investigators faced a fundamental question. What does the evidence actually show? Weeks after reclassification, they compared Brian Hooker's account to objective data. What they found reshaped the entire investigation. Modern maritime investigations operate in a world most people don't understand. Every contemporary vessel creates a digital record. Every communication device logs interactions. Every electrical system documents power flow. The physical world leaves traces. Digital systems leave records. Together, they create a timeline that cannot be disputed. Decades ago, cases like this dissolved into conflicting stories, one person's word against another. No way to determine truth. But modern technology changed everything. GPS records document exact locations at specific moments. Battery systems log when electrical power was drawn. Communication records show who contacted whom and when. These aren't opinions. These aren't faulty memories. These are facts recorded by machines incapable of deception. The critical question was stark. Did his account align with what the evidence showed? The answer was no. Investigators reconstructed everything. Where was the sailboat actually positioned at each moment? The electronic systems answered. What did the vessel's electronics reveal about activity aboard during those hours? The battery logs showed exactly what happened. What information did personal devices provide about locations and movements? GPS records documented every location change. Where did communications occur? Phone records showed everything. Piece by piece, the contradictions emerged. Major ones, not small inconsistencies, not memory lapses. Fundamental contradictions that revealed his account was false. The vessel became central. Forensic technicians placed the Soulmate in a secure facility. They analyzed when systems activated. They documented power draws during specific time frames. They reviewed records of water system usage, of electrical draws, of navigation system engagement. Everything was recorded. Everything was documented. Modern boats with sophisticated electronics and lithium battery systems maintain automatic logs, designed for safety, for operational efficiency, but they also create evidence trails that cannot be challenged. Every action aboard that vessel left a digital signature. Every signature was preserved. What those signatures revealed became the foundation of the investigation. Federal authorities had the evidence. The specific details remained confidential, available only to prosecutors, only to those building the case. Financial records were pulled and analyzed. Insurance policies, financial difficulties, pressures, debts, circumstances that might provide context for what investigators believed occurred. These were systematic investigative steps, standard procedures in cases where evidence suggests something beyond accident. Communications became critical. Text messages, emails, phone records. When did he contact emergency services? What exactly did he report? When had he and Lynette last communicated? Were there conversations with others about the trip? About concerns? About relationship tensions? Every communication became potentially relevant. Relationship history was examined thoroughly. Friends and family members were interviewed. Had they observed anything unusual? Were there documented concerns? What had Lynette mentioned to them? What had Brian expressed to them? These conversations, conducted independently, could corroborate or contradict his narrative. Lynette's daughter, Carly Ellsworth, came forward publicly. She spoke with conviction. Something didn't align with his account. She had observed physical changes in her mother, emotional changes. She described stress related to relationship dynamics, changes that occurred in months before the disappearance. These were observations, but observations matter in investigations. They provide context. They help investigators understand relationship patterns. They suggest where deeper investigation should focus. Carly referenced something heavier. Prior incidents in the relationship. Incidents that troubled her deeply. Incidents she believed were significant enough that they explained what might have happened on April 4th. Her statements didn't prove guilt, but they provided critical background. The kind of information that helps investigators understand motivation, behavior patterns, intent. When law enforcement reclassifies a case from accidental disappearance to murder investigation, they've found something substantial. Not necessarily proof, but enough to justify the pivot. Enough contradictions, enough inconsistencies, enough indicators that the narrative presented doesn't match objective reality. The shift happens at a precise moment, when evidence, examined collectively, creates a different conclusion than initial assumptions suggested. That moment arrived in early June 2026. Everything that followed flowed from that understanding. The investigation continued with new purpose. Evidence was analyzed with new focus. Interviews were conducted with new direction. Digital records were examined with new objectives. But the fundamental question had transformed. No longer, where is Lynette Hooker? Now, what actually happened to Lynette Hooker on April 4th, 2026? Those are fundamentally different questions. They demand fundamentally different types of evidence. And federal investigators had already found what they needed. The reclassification triggered an immediate shift in investigative intensity. Federal authorities weren't searching. They were investigating. They weren't hoping to find her alive. They were gathering evidence of a crime. That realization changed every subsequent decision. Dive teams entered the water with new purpose, not rescue, evidence collection. They knew what they might find. They prepared for it. The waters around that abandoned harbor became a crime scene. Maggie worked the coastlines, the beaches. Her handler followed her signals. Every alert was documented, every indication recorded. This wasn't casual searching. This was systematic evidence collection. Forensic technicians worked the soulmate methodically. Hours became days. Days became weeks. Every surface examined. Every system analyzed. Every electronic record extracted. The vessel revealed its secrets. What happened aboard that boat during those critical hours became increasingly clear. Federal prosecutors reviewed the findings. They studied the evidence. They consulted with investigators. They examined digital records. They reviewed timeline analysis. They considered witness statements. They evaluated physical evidence. A picture emerged, a picture that contradicted everything Brian Hooker claimed. The investigation accelerated. Additional interviews were conducted. Witness statements were re-examined. Financial records were analyzed. Communication patterns were scrutinized. The case expanded in scope and intensity. Federal authorities understood what they were building. They had evidence, they had contradictions. They had a narrative that fell apart under scrutiny. They had a timeline that revealed deception. What remained was the legal process, the gathering of sufficient evidence, the building of an airtight case, the preparation for prosecution. But the investigators already knew. The evidence showed. The data revealed, the timeline exposed, the contradictions proved. Something happened on April 4th, 2026, that fundamentally differed from the account that was given. We officially make it a murder case. A woman disappeared under circumstances that required explanation. Federal investigators found that explanation, not in the story told, but in the evidence recorded, in the digital signatures left behind, in the contradictions between claim and reality. Subscribe now and stay with us. The evidence continues to surface. The investigation continues to move forward. The truth continues to emerge. This investigation demonstrates something critical about modern law enforcement. Digital evidence doesn't lie. Electronic records cannot be falsified. The data preserves truth. A woman disappeared. Her family demanded answers. Federal authorities delivered by examining what modern technology revealed. Not guesses, not assumptions, not theories. Facts, evidence, truth recorded by machines incapable of deception. For Lynette Hooker's family, the investigation offers something crucial: the promise that what actually happened will be determined. That evidence will surface. That truth will emerge. That accountability will follow. Subscribe to this channel immediately for updates as this investigation develops. The evidence continues to be analyzed. New information continues to emerge. Prosecutors continue to build their case. Hit the notification bell. Don't miss any updates about the Lynette Hooker investigation. Share this video with others who want to understand how federal investigators use modern evidence to expose the truth. Thank you for watching. The investigation continues. The evidence speaks. The truth will prevail.